Welcome to the One Speed MMA podcast with yours truly, Justin Flying Smitty Smith, and Carson giving his own nickname whenever he wants would.
I'll just go by my name if you don't mind.
I do mind. Obviously, that's why I try to give you a nickname every single time.
I'll let the fan decide.
Rob, what would you like to nickname
We can do
Carson?
we can do a poll about it. We can have submissions and then we'll do a top 4 poll if eventually we people show interest in it. But no, I was actually thinking it would be interesting if we did an episode where we reviewed hilarious names, because I thought it was stupid. I think that one chick called herself Rowdy as well. And I just think it's the worst career move in the world to name yourself Rowdy after
Beck Rawlings.
Was that Rowdy?
I believe so.
You just can't do that after.
Here. Let's see what she calls herself. I've got her Sherdog profile up right here. Her nickname is Rowdy. Yes,
boo. That's a bad move.
I can agree with that,
especially since it was like, from what I understand, bestowed on Ronda by Roddy Piper.
Maybe it was the other way around. Maybe Beck Rawling got it because he's. Oh no, but she's Australian.
No, I'm pretty sure that like Ronda had conversation. It's just I think it's bad top to bottom for. I think she should probably change her nickname.
I can agree with that, but maybe she's been around for longer. Who knows?
Doesn't matter at this point.
Yeah, I mean, just like all the other spiders,
as far
or pit bulls, or any of the Brazilians that have no
cowboy at this point.
They just have no creativity when it comes to their nicknames.
Do they not?
There's a million pit bulls, there's a million cowboys, and there's a million spiders, all out of Brazil.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a ton.
I knew pit bull. I've heard pit bull, or cyborgs.
So you guys might notice something. Yeah, cyborg. There's only one. No, it wasn't cyborg. What other cyborg?
I was just kidding.
I was going to say, I think there's only one. And then I was thinking her ex-husband also had the same name, and then I realized that is untrue. So you might notice a difference from last week.
What?
I'm here again.
Oh yeah, we did this.
You gonna welcome me back to the cast, Carson?
Well, I forgot that we are doing a second take because of reverb, so I apologize. Still there. Welcome, Justin. Yeah. We missed you in Spain. We had the sweetheart Travis on being wrong about heavyweights, but more than anything, I'm happy to be looking across at your cute mug.
Yeah, man. It's good to be back. I was actually really, really excited to come on and podcast again. There's been a very eventful week. Now we'll have a couple weeks of not too much, but at the same time, I'm excited to be talking MMA. I'm excited that people are actually listening and interacting with the podcast, and it makes it that much worth actually getting involved with this kind of thing.
Pretty sad that Velasquez is being put on Twitter.
Velasquez, which was the other
That's
comment,
okay. No, that's fine.
Which was actually very funny because he's made of glass.
Yes.
But that person didn't listen to the cast, whereas Fred did and made a appropriate Twitter joke.
Yes, he did.
Yep.
But glass also is actually pretty funny. And actually, it just goes back to what I was saying to Travis. He speaks Russian. I'm trying to learn how pronunciation. And he is just true to heavyweight form, just mispronouncing Velasquez's name because of the only icon the heavyweight division's ever had. That's not true.
Well, if he would actually listen to the cast rather than just be on it, he might actually, learn a thing or two about MMA.
Instead of boxing.
Yeah, instead of boxing and how the heavyweights are.
This just in. Travis is a boxing fan.
Apparently, he's watched all of 3 fights on the same card, and it makes him a fan. Speaking of cards in general, there was a card a couple days ago.
Your fight? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the Your Fight, the world's best card, right below Bellator. What was that? Bellator 148.
149.
149. Thank you.
I was wondering, how did you feel about the idea of that? The UR fight.
I haven't been into wrestling for a long period of time. There's only 2 fights I actually watched from it. One was the weird match between Bisping and Chael Sonnen.
Grappling.
Yeah, which it looked like they were just there knowing they were going to get paid no matter what. So they just went out there and did their thing.
Well, the problem was the ring. It was a boxing ring, so it was super slippery. They couldn't get any hold on it. And so they thought that it was also going to create problems with the MMA match, which I didn't get to watch yet. I like it as an idea. I think it's interesting. I think it helps everybody out as far as combat sports go for cross promotion, and I'm glad that they're taking the bullet for it, and that the UFC is not in Bellator to a certain extent with the Muay Thai fights and everything. But it was very poorly done.
Moving on from that, your fights. Which fights did you actually watch from that card?
I watched the Roy Jones fight versus Byron Phillips.
I saw that. So who's it? The Byron Phillips was he trained MMA, correct? Is
yeah,
what
and
said?
they got like some odd thousand different applications for it, which I thought was really interesting. And I mean, it just goes to show like it's really hard to cross over either sport. Like where people are saying that.
But do we know anything about his record or anything like that?
That was his first professional fight.
Well, I knew that, but like, okay, so he was an amateur and he trained.
I have no idea. As far as
because they said he had trained MMA, but if that's his first professional fight, obviously he hadn't been probably training for very long.
Let's see.
I mean, he had a jab, and he was trying to keep him at bay, but it didn't seem like his striking wasn't very crisp. They said that he had an MMA stance as compared to a boxing stance,
which was weird. I thought he didn't. I thought he was standing super narrow.
It was definitely interesting. He just didn't. I mean,
did it not look like his stance was super narrow though?
It was a lot wider than Roy Jones Jr.'s.
Was it?
Yeah,
because it looked like he was tucking his chin. I didn't agree with that necessarily. I need to go back and watch it. But I actually did appreciate that though, and that's the thing that I liked about this. The idea of this card is it did bring me over to boxing and make me appreciate it for, especially after the Bisping Sonnen, when it was like two people that you know and love, you hate what they did, but two people you don't know at all, and it was actually more interesting.
You appreciate what they actually. Yeah, Roy Jones Jr. I knew, I didn't expect it to end so quickly. I mean, he stepped into that right cross and he just crumpled. And, I mean, it shows you what power boxers have with those gigantic gloves. And I think sometimes we forget that boxers can knock each other out because they usually hug each other for 12 rounds.
Well, and precision. That precision is solid. It was funny to hear Rampage announce, too.
I didn't think he did very well.
No, and I don't think any of them did. JR was pretty great. JR was like, I mean, JR has been doing his whole life. That's what he does.
Yeah,
but
an actual announcer.
But he doesn't, I mean, I don't think he knows enough across all disciplines to be able to comment on all of it. But again, I think it's overall, I hope the UFC doesn't necessarily do it, but I think more things like that need to happen where they need to build combat sports up and not talk about boxing's better than UFC, UFC is better than Muay Thai, like, because everybody's saying that UFC is going to, or MMA, excuse me, is going to replace all those other disciplines in the Olympics. It never will, and it never should. I would like to see MMA in the Olympics. Maybe we should have that as a topic for another day, because I think we could have a discussion about that. Yeah, we can. I'll probably base mine around I don't want to see that really. I like it independent.
The only reason I would like to see it is because it's a way, and obviously they'd have to work out contract negotiations and that, but it's almost like Pride, where
Not
you can
really.
actually go
they
represent.
Do the boxing.
What? Sorry, I didn't understand.
I don't think it messes with your contract at all if it's in the Olympics, because I mean boxing.
Well, and they're also professional. Are they allowing professionals into now?
Roy Jones. They said Roy Jones got a silver medal when he did it. So I don't know.
So my thing is this: like Pride, they definitely represented their countries. You had the Japanese, you had the American, you had the Brazilians, and it would be cool to see MMA fighters that wouldn't necessarily potentially fight in the UFC based on rankings and popularity and that kind of thing, fight because they, per country. And I think that would be a really cool thing because you'd get matchups that you wouldn't necessarily see in the UFC. And then you could get a crossover between Bellator and WSOF and whatever else based on the countries that they were coming from. And that's why I would like to see it, not like...
Okay,
if that makes any sense.
I was a little confused by it. So you want to see like crossover in what sense? Like
no crossover. So
where you want to be able to like a platform where you can see mixed martial artists go up against each other, even if they're not like. So if you get to see,
we get to see the best Spanish fighter against the best Holland fighter against the best American fighter, and obviously it's in a tournament fashion, but at the same time. It's people that might not face each other in the UFC that now have a chance, not based on rankings, based on how well they do in an actual fight, to get to the next fight, if that makes any sense. So you could actually see a Gegard Mousasi fight an Anderson Silva, or you could see him fight like a Chris Weidman or something like that, where they might not actually fight. Obviously, we have to depend on weight differences and different things like that. But you can actually see them cross over and fight different people, but that they would not fight based on rankings in the UFC. Does that make sense?
It does, but I mean, I don't really want to see it in that platform, because I think it would take away from the other sports at that point. I think, first off, there's too many. Are you going to do all the way up to heavyweight for women too? Like, it's just going to go right along with the men's. Or how many does each country get a representative? That's 2 weeks that you would have to get everything figured out, and those guys take, bad hits during fights. I just don't see in those 2 weeks how you could do a whole tournament.
That makes sense. They do boxing, and if you can't compete, you don't go on.
And it's rough, man. Like, that's
when you have to plan around when your contract. For the UFC, you're getting paid. So, but at the same time, you can get sponsorships in the Olympics, which you can't get in the UFC.
You can't take your sponsorships on with you, though, can you?
Because you represent just your country. Yeah. But a lot of those guys will pick up sponsorships that they wear to the press conferences and things like that.
That's true.
And it's definitely a discussion for another day. I'd like to look at what they've done.
We'll do some more research and get into it.
Because obviously we disagree on this, and it would be something that would be interesting to actually discuss with further research. Getting back to this card, though, top to bottom, it wasn't a bad card. The Fight Pass, I started watching the first fight, didn't really like it, realized all of them went to decision. I was on a plane when most of these went down, and decided not to watch them. And sounds like I didn't miss much. It sounds like most of these were just meh fights.
I was watching March Madness, and then on my way to get you from the airport, so I didn't really watch any of them. I
did watch most of the other ones as I was waiting, because I had my Fox Sports 1 Go app, my Fox Go app. So I did see the submission by Dan Hooker, and he looked really, really good. Alan Jouban with his knockout looked absolutely amazing. Clipped him and just took him out. I'd really like to see him get a step up in competition. He's looked really, really good his last couple of fights, but they've kind of been spoon-feeding him. So I'd like to see him get a step up in competition. Beck Rawlings versus Seo Hee Ham was a scrap, but it was non-technical, and it was kind of back and forth. It could have been a split decision, I think, but Beck Rawlings definitely started to dominate towards the end. And so nothing really towards, pointing out. And then James Tahuna, which I did not expect. That's when we started watching. No, that was still on my...
Yeah, no, I only pretty much saw, because we went and got 7-Elevens and pizza. I pretty much only saw the part of that one fight, and then we went and got food, and then I saw the co-main and the main.
Yeah, no, we did miss... we watched them, but the one was a TKO, and I don't remember it. But James Tahuna, 56-second knockout, I didn't expect it. I'm pretty sure anyone that put money on Steve Boss won, because James Tahuna is definitely a better known fighter. But good for Steve Boss for coming in there and doing his job and throwing a great right cross and knocking him out in 52 seconds. So, but let's get into the Neil Magny Hector Lombard. What were your thoughts on this?
Fight was way awesome. I think it kind of played out how we thought. Well, I actually thought if it would have the first round, if I would have known that Neil Magny was going to get knocked down, I would have said, "Oh yeah, well, Hector Lombard wins that fight." Weathers a storm, and then Lombard at the end of the first, when they both got up, just flat on his feet, standing right in front of him in the center of the octagon, and he still had a little bit more output, but then it was pretty much over at that point.
He knocked him down again in the second, which was very interesting. They definitely, I think, could have called that fight in the first. I think Hector Lombard obviously was going for that finish. Having that much muscle mass by anyone, and I think kind of this is what happened with Conor McGregor, because he wasn't used to having that much muscle mass at 170. You have to feed your muscles. And when you have that adrenaline dump of thinking you're going to win, and Gleison Tibau was one of those people that could usually make it 3 to 5 rounds, even though he was huge. But Hector Lombard, Yoel Romero hasn't really shown a gigantic gas tank. Brock Lesnar never had to go 3 to 5 rounds. I posted on Twitter, like, yeah, if you have that big of muscles, it's really hard not to gas. And I had several people not agree with me, but they really couldn't prove. The people that were brought up were 2 heavyweights that weren't pure muscle. And then the third one was Brock Lesnar. And the fact was he never had to go out of the second round. So, I mean, it never really showed. And if you watch him against Shane Carwin, it looked like he started to gas. And if you looked at him versus Cain Velasquez, it also looked like he started to gas. It's just like soccer players. Soccer players don't benefit from being gigantic, muscular, phenoms. They have to run 14 miles a game. It's better if they're just fit and they actually can and just run and run and run. Whereas I believe the MMA fighters are the same. I believe that dropping weight actually helps with cardio to a certain extent. Whereas, fighting at weight such as Conor or Hector Lombard having to drop down to that weight and still being that muscular is hard for them to not gas because their muscles require so many nutrients and so much that it's difficult for them to actually, last that long.
Yeah, and so when he's on the ground and just throwing bombs. Kudos to Neil Magny for getting up after those because Lombard's big. And then he looked good from there, and that's I would highly recommend him not get what was it? Was it a cross that he got hit with, or was it just a jab that he initially got knocked down with?
I believe it was a cross, and then he got thrown around after that.
I would highly recommend not getting that from a T-Rex in the future and just get pummeled, especially because the people are going to be a lot longer that you fight going forward.
I'm glad he beat Hector Lombard. I'm not the biggest Hector Lombard fan.
If it's anything like Anderson Silva, he had to have been tested roughly 8 times since he got pinged. But why does it keep doing that? But yeah, if he doesn't piss hot again, I don't know where he is getting all this muscle mass from.
I mean, once you gain it, it might be easier to actually keep. But yeah, I definitely agree with you. It's definitely interesting. Do you think they should have called it in the first? You think he made the right decision by not calling it in the first?
I don't know what verbally was being said. I would have called it.
Visual, yeah, and that's a solid point. He could have been asking, give some kind of sign that you're still here, and he could have been saying,
it's like
the audio.
It's like the Czech Congo Pat Barry one, though. I'm glad that they didn't. I love fights like that. It sucks when people get put through the meat grinder like that, and they gotta, for our entertainment, they've got to maybe lose a couple fights off their career. As a fan, though, I do like seeing it in the moment. Going back, I feel for Neil Magny, but then they probably could have called it in the second, right? When he flattened out Hector Lombard.
Oh yeah, no. There was 100 unanswered punches. Yeah, They definitely could have called it.
So there's 2 that they could have, and then they eventually did in the third, right? Is that right?
Yeah,
it finished in the third.
He finished in the third.
Also, kudos to Lombard for still trying to eke it out in the third too. I can only imagine he was exhausted because he looked exhausted after the first.
Well, the hard part is when you're just laying on your stomach and taking punches to the head and not really trying to move or twist or anything. He was waiting for that ref to call the fight, and that ref did a terrible job of calling the fight. He was just not defending himself. He was still conscious, but he was done.
Yeah, could have got called should have got called earlier, but we got a great fight out of it. It was the fight of the night.
Yep,
hands down,
100%.
Unless you're Travis, and then the main event was the fight of the night.
How much weight do you think the fighters lose in an average match?
It depends, Jordan. That's Jordan coming from Zcast. For people that will be listening later, it depends on your actual.
Does he mean cutting or how much weight would you lose while fighting, during sweating and?
No, I think he's talking
physical exhaustion.
You're talking about cutting weight for the weigh-ins, Jordan, right?
Yeah, if we're referring to that, and that's what we'll move forward with. One of those things is, I would say, 20 pounds? They've changed their IVs now, so that obviously changes a lot of things. We actually did an entire episode on weight cutting, Jordan, that you can go back. It's called the weight cutting episode, where we talk.
It's gonna be hard to find.
No, it's not.
No, I know. I'm just kidding.
Because there's only
it's very
6
straightforward. But no, it's roughly probably around 20 pounds. I think Connor probably when he went in that 170, he was actually probably, I think that's probably what he cuts down from to 145 usually too. I don't think he actually bulked up too much for that fight.
I think he did.
So what, 15 pounds then?
I think it should, well, no, it used to be 20.
He weighed in at 168.
It used to easily be 20 pounds that they would cut. Now with IVs, I think it's a little bit less. You would see fighters go from almost 200 to 155 in a month period.
It's pretty much all water weight, Jord. It's funny because Justin's cousin actually, and I think we've told this story before on the podcast, but the gym that I used to train at, it was in between two pizza places and a Subway.
Yeah.
And Justin's cousin Jordan was cutting weight and had some choice words for our instructor. He's like, "Who the hell puts an MMA gym between two pizza places?" It was a Little Skeezers and then also One Man Band or something like that, and a Subway. And he's just sitting there on a treadmill in a sweatsuit, just being tortured because it's literally the same building. It's like on the back of a pizza place. So it's torture.
Yeah. Two guys, a girl, in a pizza place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was the girl. Aldo and Jordan
were the guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, they definitely cut quite a bit of weight. They've changed some things up quite a bit, and we covered that in the other podcast. Last fight, of course, we had Frank Mir, Mark Hunt. I think I was one of the people that believed if Frank Mir could get out of the first round, he would do great. However, after seeing how he actually showed up looking and entering the ring, if I would have watched the weigh-ins, I would have said that he wouldn't make it out of the first round. He doesn't look physically athletic like he used to.
No. Well, no.
I mean, he can probably still run circles around me, but he didn't look like the same Frank Mir.
I mean, I respect them both as practitioners. I don't know if either of them will ever make a run again for the title.
Brian Stan called for Frank Mir's retirement. He said that he needed to retire and just stick to commentary. The hard part is Frank Mir is probably one of the best known because he's been around for so long and most liked fighters.
And because of fighting Brock Lesnar.
And fighting Brock Lesnar, exactly. And beating Brock Lesnar. But I think he needs to be done. I'm not one of those guys. I mean, Frank Mir could easily be the next Dan Severn that just continues to fight for forever.
Well, why don't him and, I mean, Roy Nelson still has maybe a few more miles, but why don't him and Roy do the Eddie Bravo? I mean, I think they could bring like a lot of people to those jiu-jitsu cards.
Fight pass, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I would love to see Roy Nelson and Frank Mir fight in an only jiu-jitsu match.
That'd be cool.
I don't know if that's a really solid point because
they're both black belts.
A lot of people forget Frank Mir was almost 100% jiu-jitsu when he first entered the UFC, and he crushed everybody because
there was no answer for it in the heavyweight division because
exactly.
They're all wrestlers. They wanted to take him down, so they did. And he's like, great. Yeah. This is phenomenal.
I mean, that was the first time I'd ever seen an Americana. That was the first time, like...
Breaking Nogueira's arm.
I actually didn't see that fight. I don't know what I was doing, but I actually missed that one. But Frank Mir loses. First round TKO, the walk-off. I at first thought it was a little too soon for stoppage, and then after the replays, it definitely solidified that.
I'm not one for saying that he should walk away. I mean, walk away when you want. Like, it's your job. Like, I don't think anybody should retire if they're not ready to, because there's so much psychology that goes into sports and things like that. And I don't know. Like, I'm not for imposition of will and people trying to influence other people. As far as Frank Mir goes, I would like to see him probably retire because of the problems that he's had with prescription drugs in the past. And maybe he's beat it. I mean, per him, he beat it, and that's great. But I mean, who was I talking to? Or not talking? I was listening to. They were talking about when you get done with fights, you go into such like a lull because all you think about that whole time is just that fight, and then you go out there and there's all these people, and then like you're doing all these media things, and then the second it's over, you're still an athlete, you're still a professional athlete, you're still doing it. The second it's over and like the post-fight press conference dies down, for the majority, people stop talking to you until your next fight starts going, and so you just have this deflation where one, you're not preparing for anything anymore, and nobody cares. And especially when it goes into retirement, like if that happens to him too, where he's had these issues before after his motorcycle accident, I'd get nervous that he might relapse if he's not going to. And I mean, overall, I don't know, everything top to bottom, I think the Frank Mir situation needs to be handled delicately.
Yeah, and I agree with that. You need something to fight for, to keep your senses about you and to keep your mind in the right place. And I understand that.
It's weird though, because it could affect him either way, whether he stays in or if he leaves.
Because being in pain all of the time or getting knocked out and not being able to eat food is going to cause issues, or just having too much free time. And he's not one of those guys that you hear about. I mean, I guess he can do announcing and stuff for the UFC.
He's very smart.
Yeah. Oh, he's a super smart dude, but he's not one of those guys that you hear that's doing extracurricular activities to make sure that he has a job after MMA. You know, he's not a Chad Mendez. He's not a, you know, Conor McGregor, you know, looking at movies and different things like that, or Ronda Rousey, you know, Uriah Fabers that are trying to get other things going on. TJ Dillashaw just started a woodworking business with his buddies. Like, everyone, the younger generation of UFC fighters tend to know that they're only going to be able to fight till, you know, 35, 36 when they're, you know, started at 25 and trying to start, you know, another career when they're done. And Frank Mir doesn't seem to really be there. I don't think Mark Hunt's really there. Like, that older generation seems to have missed it.
How'd you feel about the him trolling everybody after on his post fight when he was like, oh my gosh, you just said it, Mark Hunt.
I didn't see it. What did he do?
Like when he was told everybody that they were going to have the after party and that it was only going to cost him $200 a ticket. It's like $3 to $4 or something like that. And everybody, like, there was like this like gasp like in the club, and he's like, no, I'm just kidding.
That's like, pretty funny. No, I missed that.
It's just a $200 entry. We'll see you out there.
I've been trying to catch up. I've been listening to the MMA Hour and trying to get to Chael Sonnen and the Fighter and the Kid, and you know, missing 2 weeks of that is rough, especially because the MMA Hour is 4 hours long.
Yeah, I can't ever do it. I'll go and listen to whatever specific interview I think's interesting, and I'm really happy they break it up the way that they do, because I can't keep up on the MMA Hour. Ariel does too much.
I put it, 4 hours every Monday. I put it on at work and just listen to it like that. That's one of the only ones. By Wednesday, I'm on a podcast.
Really?
Yeah, well, because I do the MMA Hour.
You need Sword and Scale.
I do Chael Sonnen. I do, MMA podcasts. I got plenty of other podcasts. I do The Fighter and the Kid, and those are all done.
I don't really do any of. I mean, I do Chael Sonnen, which his is kind of MMA. He doesn't really focus on MMA. He kind of does everything. Joe Rogan occasionally when something's interesting, but I even like a lot of his isn't even just MMA. I don't know if I listen to just an MMA podcast. There aren't really a ton out there, actually, now that I think of it, of people in the industry.
We've got a lot of people on Twitter that do the same thing, but...
In the industry, like the people that are coming out, like Joe Rogan's actually in it.
But
Brandon Schaub.
Big John McCarthy's got his. Jens Pulver just came out with one. There's a lot of different people.
And they just focus on MMA and MMA commentary? Or do they talk about...
I don't know. I haven't listened to him yet. But yeah, no, Joe Rogan has really crazy guests. Some of them are MMA related. Some of them are, you know, he's drug dealers.
Well, I love it like his, because they just talk so openly about everything, and it is just like we have 3 hours. We have no agenda. We're gonna talk about your book or your whatever you're putting out, and we're gonna get to know each other. I really like that format, but it's rough because I don't have it's literally like 20 hours a week that you have to listen to like Joe Rogan podcasts.
Yeah, no, and that's the hard part too with the MMA Hour. I started listening to it a lot before we started doing this, and then afterwards, I've never gone back and listened to really old episodes. And a lot of times he'll do You Think You Know or whatever it is, where he does y'all must have forgot, that's what it is, where he does the past interviews that he redoes over again, and I usually skip through those because they're old interviews. So I try, that's 30 minutes that I can skip so I can actually get to the more current interviews.
Did you watch the Rory McDonald one in MMA Hour, or did you watch the Holly Holm one today?
I was listening to the Rory McDonald one in the car before you got here. Very interesting, him talking about free agency.
Yeah.
What did you think about that?
I would actually also like to do that as one of the topics for a later episode, but I thought it was very interesting, especially because it's more fighters need to be vocal about it. And one, so it's not demonizing the UFC, because he said it. He's like, we're not far off. We're not talking. I'm not talking like they're not trying to pay me 20, and I'm not asking for 200. He's like, we're not far off. We just couldn't come to agreement. And if we don't, it's not a big deal. I'll move on. And the UFC, I think it needs to be seen by fans that it's not that big of a deal to them, but there is workings that, like, I don't know. I just think it's better publicized because it kind of looks like the UFC is getting a bad rap right now, but I also think they need to acknowledge that there's a lot of threatening of fighters leaving, which they know, they're not idiots.
But Roy McDonald also knows that he can get a lot more pay if he just pushes for it. Matt Mitrione left because he was going to get more money. I think what the UFC does with a lot of fighters is promises them less guaranteed money and higher amounts if they either are a number one contender or win a title. That's what they did with Benson Henderson. I'm guessing with Matt Mitrione, obviously a lot of them can't discuss their contracts, but I'm guessing
they can though because they release a lot of it. It has to be public because that's why like we get all of their pay.
But if they don't sign it, you know what I mean? If they don't sign the contract, then there's no reason for them to release it. And I guess they could talk about it openly afterwards, but some of them choose not to. Matt Mitrione's new contract with Bellator is only 4 fights. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't try and go back to the UFC if he goes on a 4-fight win streak in Bellator, which is completely plausible. Now that Kimbo Slice is a 1-year suspension, there's less people that can try and get a money fight from Kimbo Slice. For those that may not know, it's been all over that he tested positive for
methadone.
No, that was Ken Shamrock.
Oh, I thought it was Kimbo.
It was androstene and androlistine, however it's pronounced.
How dare he? But everyone knows you don't take androlistine.
Yeah,
everybody knows that.
Frankenstein. Do you know? I also pronounce it Igor. Yeah. So anyway, but the interesting thing is they both tested positive for the same steroid, which a lot of time it wasn't I'm gonna stop. Anyway, but yeah, no, as you just mentioned,
continue.
Hydralistol.
It sounds like a steroid from Game of Thrones that you're trying to say, and it probably has 4 different names.
He didn't test positive for the Sylvester Stallone. He tested positive for the.
That's what we should start doing. Whoever makes the steroid famous, we should start naming it after them. That's
Shamrock.
A genius idea.
It makes it easier to pronounce.
Yeah.
He tested positive for the Ken Shamrock.
Yeah, I mean, yes. And if you get a Diaz, you just ping for high metabolites and weed.
Yeah, he had a ton of THC in his system. He pinged for the Diaz.
Yeah, he got a Diaz. That's a great idea.
He got a Diaz twice over. The size of the Diaz was 2 times the normal size.
He got the spider.
Which is just Viagra. But what was it? Taiwanese Viagra or Vietnamese?
I don't know. What's the Yoel Romero? He had a weird one.
Yeah, his was super bizarre too.
Yoel.
Speaking of this as well, Tim Means, apparently, I think they're dropping that.
Really?
His case. However, let's get into one actually kind of scary thing, which is Ken Shamrock testing positive for methadone, which is basically
testing positive for Shamrock.
Yeah, I mean, it was right around St. Paddy's Day, so
I just want people to be calling me in my job asking if we cover Shamrock replacement therapy or whatever.
Shamrock. No, it's TRT. His stuff's a little bit higher, unless it's a methadone, which
methadone's a therapy.
Unless you go in, rehab therapy.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I get calls for.
Oof.
I'm an appeals specialist at an insurance company. Is what happens.
Ouch.
Not that often, but I just want somebody to say Shamrock.
Yeah, Shamrock.
Let's make that Let's make that. See, Jordan wants it. Let's make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, with that. Super sad. Obviously, Bellator does almost. I mean, supposedly they were testing them beforehand, but I don't believe that Bellator's testing is very good. This kind of proves it. I think a lot of fighters that are using, you're going to see a Brazilian influx. I think in Bellator. Maybe the Russians will stay there as well. Russians are getting in trouble for not testing for the Olympics or not having good enough testing for the Olympics. They've actually been threatened that they're going to leave them out of the Olympics if they don't do better testing. So maybe that's why there's so many Russians in
Russia,
Bellator.
Though, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a solid point. Maybe it's in the future, but yeah, the Winter Olympics is
that's part of the problem is I know that they're threatening to walk, and I think a certain sport is not eligible at this point, but it's in Russia. They're not walking.
Oh, so they're going to remove the Olympics from Russia?
No, there's no time for that. That's an impossibility.
They can come back to the 2002 Olympics here in Salt Lake City, where we still have the infrastructure, and
we're
one of the only ones that gained money on the Olympic Games.
Yeah, Winter Olympic Games, not the summer. And
they're going to do Summer Olympics in
Russia,
Segovia or whatever.
Yeah, they just did the winter ones 2 years ago. Starts with an S. I'll look it up, but they did that, and then so this one it's the Russian Summer Olympics.
I didn't know they were doing it. I thought they were going to do that. I mean, it's interesting because I just figured it would be the Winter Olympics, and that's ignorance on my part. That I just would figure that they would be doing the Winter Olympics.
This is gonna piss me off so bad. I have to figure this out.
So yeah, no, Bellator definitely needs to step up their game. It was very Sochi. No, that's in Russia.
That's what I just said.
But it was just in Sochi, or it's going to be in Sochi.
No, it was in Sochi in 2014.
Yeah, so that's done.
Yeah,
that was in Russia.
Yes,
and now they're saying that the Russians won't be able to come to the next Olympics if they don't.
It's in Russia.
Again?
The Summer Olympics is in Russia.
Where?
Hold on. Russia.
They don't ever do it in the same country twice.
They just did. No, they didn't.
Yeah.
It's Brazil.
Yeah. Same diff. They're still not going to get tested. Yeah, I was like, wait a minute. That's completely.
Well, and that's maybe what I was thinking of, because they just did the World Cup in Brazil, and now they're doing the Olympics in Brazil, and that's why. But still, I don't know what that was.
Some kind of cup.
But anyways, Russians and Brazilians, they're both
sketch.
The Russians I love the Bigger, Stronger, Faster, where they talk about the Russians starting it, and then we made a mad dash to compete, and that's where steroids got its start, was in the Olympics.
Yeah, Sarapova, but she didn't get busted for steroids. She got busted for I
was talking about from Bigger, Stronger, Faster.
But I'm just thinking about all the people, and it's always interesting to me when other people, especially in professional biking, come out and are like, you just can't do that kind of stuff. When professional biking, Tour de France, people are supposed to be the worst at any kind of doping. Anyway,
it's really interesting to hear Lance Armstrong talk about it on Joe Rogan's podcast.
I need to check that out. I didn't hear it.
It's pretty interesting because he's like, I don't condone it. I was wrong, but it's pretty interesting. I mean, he's like, I had to do it or we wouldn't be able to compete, and all of our sponsorships would have pulled out. And it's interesting the
psychology behind it.
Well, not even that, just the atmosphere that's presented to them and the options that they have.
I wrote an ESPN, I don't know if they still do, but ESPN, the magazine, they actually used to have an article that was by an anonymous player in certain sports. And I read one on professional biking, and he was trying to break into the Tour de France, and he was basically right to where he could start winning, but the only way he could actually start winning was to start doping just like everyone else did. And he was like, everybody in the top tier of biking is using some kind of performance-enhancing drug. And, I mean, it's kind of showing and proving that correct.
If it's not a collision sport, I say do it. I have no problem with it.
Yeah. And once again, we've discussed this based on the physicality. I mean, Kimbo Slice could have killed Data 5000. I mean, not only because Data 5000 was in bad shape, but because he should have had a higher output based on the performance-enhancing drugs that he was using.
So pretty much anything collision that could be deemed like a violent sport, like football or combat sports, hockey, you shouldn't do steroids. Other than that, go for it. I could not care less if Olympians or bicyclists, cyclists, whatever the hell they're called, if they do it, I couldn't care less.
Yeah, it's definitely something we've discussed before, and I'm sure it's something we'll discuss in the future.
Never again. That was it.
But
that was the last note on it ever.
Let's get into the discussion we wanted to have this week, which is on women's divisions of MMA.
It was one that I kind of wanted to talk on because I was kind of thinking about personally, why I was intriguing to me is, one, it's really interesting that no other sport, and I understand why, I'm not holding them accountable, but I think it's interesting that combat sports really have kind of been on the forefront of making sure that women's is right along equal to men's. And as far as because you can't really put the WNBA right next to the NBA. I don't know why not, but I just feel I don't know, they are just different products.
But you could put the lingerie league right next to the NFL.
MTV doesn't have rights to the NFL.
Oh, it's the point. Or the XFL,
MTV too.
Or XFL anymore.
Well, I mean, and that's, I don't know. Overall, what's your opinion on state of women's MMA?
Well, before we get into that, let's get into the history of women's MMA,
let's do it.
We? So I actually found a sweet article on SureDog that talks a lot about this up until about 2013, and then we'll kind of take over from there. But so women's fighting first kind of took place kind of in back streets and back alleys and stuff, but it was actually inducted into the Olympics. Speaking of the Olympics, in 1904, That's when women were actually allowed to.
MMA, or are you talking combat sports?
We're talking combat sports.
Okay. I was going to say that's
professional combat sports, like regulated combat sports. In 1904, and then obviously 2 world wars kind of caused some issues. And then around 1995, so a little bit after the UFC had launched, they started to actually do Vale Toro type of women's MMA, mostly out in Japan. And so some of these happened, especially when women's professional wrestling disbanded. Apparently, there was all kinds of weird political strife at the time. And so a lot of different type of people started to create different Japanese promotions. And they actually had one of the first events was a 12-woman one-night. One of the first, legitimate events was a 12-woman one-night MMA tournament that took place, and the one in 2000, and the winner actually won $100,000. Do you know who the winner was? Probably.
When was it? What year?
2000. You'll never guess. And this name very much surprised me. She's still fighting today.
She's still fighting today. I'm gonna say, it's not Gina Carano because she's not fighting.
Nope.
Not Cyborg.
Nope.
Who is it?
Cohen. Merlos Cohen.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I don't know who she is. I'm sorry.
Well,
the WoW is not like, oh my gosh, she's still going? I don't know who she is.
She's in Invicta. Okay. She was one of the Strikeforce fighters. I think when it first launched into the UFC, she was one of the top only 5-6 fighters.
What was the weight class?
Brought in
135 was it Bantam?
This was 135. She actually won against a 6'1", 230-pound Japanese fighter. Yeah. By
how big was she?
6'1", 230 pounds.
Jeez.
And she beat her by armbar. She was only 19 years old at the time.
Yeesh.
Yep. And so after that, they had Remix, Smack Girl, a whole bunch of different ones. And then
Smack Girl?
Yeah, Smack Girl. The post-remix landscape.
Yeah, they got to get away from that name.
Yeah. Dominated until close to October 2008, interestingly enough. Yao Ming. Yeah. Except Yao Ming's what, like 6'7", Jordan?
Yao Ming is 7'2".
Okay, then I was way off. So anyway, when it actually started to take place is when Elite XC actually started to put women in there. And let's see what I got here.
No. Yao Ming is 7'6".
Oh, jeez.
I had to look that up. Sorry, go ahead.
So anyway, so after that, basically, hook and shoot became one of the sport's most reliable. You can actually look at some of these women if you go back to their SureDog accounts or whatever, their profiles, and go back. A lot of them are actually involved in hook and shoot, which is super interesting. And then Bodog actually came out. And do you remember all the controversy about Bodog?
Mm-mm.
So before the Tough Women competition, Bodog actually had a exact kind of contest where they put a bunch of women in a house like Tough and then had them fight for a contract or like $100,000 or whatever it was. Bodog went bankrupt at the same time that they were all in this house, and none of them actually got paid. So most of them went into this house, didn't have enough like.
I would have done squatters' rights. I'd have stayed there until, and I'm like, this is my house.
Yeah, no, it was.
You can't kick me out.
It was super bad news. So when Tough 20 actually came out, where they're going to do all women, a lot of them were like, we don't know if we want to do this because last time we got talked into this, it ended up being just a complete shit show, and a lot of us ended up losing a lot of money because we didn't get paid for being there, and we didn't have a contract when we got out of the house. So it was a lose-lose situation for all of us. So it really started to pick up when Elite XC went out of business after the freaking Kimbo Slice, Seth Petrezzi or whatever. I'm really good with names today. Still a little jet-lagged. Anyway, so when they went out of business and Strikeforce bought them, Gina Carano was actually part of that Elite XC purchase.
Jordan, who did Gina Carano play in the new Deadpool?
Yeah, in Deadpool.
Please answer. Go ahead. Sorry.
So anyway, that's when it actually started to kind of legitimize it. But at this time, women's MMA was still, I think, 2 rounds at 3 minutes apiece. So it wasn't until they got into the UFC that they actually extended women's MMA to a 5-round or a three 5-minute rounds. So even then, they still protected them. I actually remember I looked it up in 2010. I watched Miesha Tate win a one-night tournament over Girl Fight Monster, one of the Japanese fighters.
She was in Utah. We watched that for fight in Utah.
We did watch her fight in Utah, but this was in Arizona. And so she actually ended up winning this tournament, and that was the first time I'd actually ever seen Miesha Tate fight. But before that, Gina Carano actually became the face of women's MMA.
One of the first crossovers.
Yes, she was in The Fast and the Furious, which I did not know. She was also in American Gladiators, which I did know.
She did, what was it? Something Wire? Something
Haywire, which I never watched.
Me either. I like the commercial. She does the thing where she gets them into a triangle, and I remember that, and I was like, hey, MMA.
Yeah, so she did really well. They said the biggest difference between her and Ronda Rousey is Ronda Rousey liked the spotlight, and Gina Carano didn't like doing interviews and different things like that. So she likes acting, and she did really well that way, but she didn't like the actual like spotlight. And then, of course, she got crushed by Chris Cyborg, absolutely dismantled in about 2013.
But then Cyborg pinged for Cyborg.
Yes. Cyborg then beat another woman half to death, and then she pinged for Cyborg.
This is a thing.
Yeah.
This is going to be a thing, man.
Yep, she got pinged for Cyborg and was actually taken out for 12 months. During that time, Ronda Rousey hit her heyday, so Cyborg couldn't be the next weird-looking face of women's MMA, even though she seems like a really nice person. And that's when Ronda Rousey really started to take over, and then obviously the rest is history. She was the last Strikeforce Women's Champion and the first UFC Women's Champion. Interestingly enough, one last thing, Gina Carano actually fought at 140 pounds. Mm-hmm. There was no 115, no 125, no 135. They fought at 140, which doesn't make a ton of sense. But yeah, so that's a very brief history of women's MMA. You can definitely get more information on that on SureDog. That's where I got a lot of my information from. The other thing that was really good, so the first ones that came in were 135, and then they had the Tough 20, which was 115, and I thought it was 125, the straw weights, that I was actually incorrect. So Tough 20 was to actually sign the new strawweight women's champion, and at that time it was actually Carla Esparza that was the champion in Invicta who was in the house, and that was the first time that they actually got paid per fight in the Tough House. They got $8,000 per fight, and Carla Esparza actually got $10,000 per fight while in the Tough House.
Oh man, I thought she was going to beat Joanna, and when she came out of that, she did not.
No, and Joanna wasn't even on there. Paige Van Zandt was supposed to be on there, but she was under 21, and because there's so much alcohol in the house, they weren't going to do it. So crossover. I've been talking for a while. What are your thoughts on women's MMA?
So just in general, again, why I kind of thought it was interesting is it's the only, like, you can't do March Madness, the women's March Madness, right along the side men's, just because it doesn't sell. What is it different about combat sports as opposed to like traditional team sports and things like that? Because it's weird. Tennis is the same, so it's not like, and that might be because of the Williams sisters and Maria Sharapova and Anna Kournikova. Like, they're very good crossover stars, but I don't know. Why do you think it's different where women can headline a UFC card, or for a while boxing has been able to also have like headline cards by women and things like that, but there's not the same crossover.
You're making a point for us, Jordan.
Yep.
The sexualization of women's MMA.
Well, just in general.
Yeah, of women.
Yeah, you know. Well, just in general, like it's sexualized anyways.
Wait, women or women's MMA?
No, MMA.
Okay, I guess yeah, men and women.
How many times have you yelled north south? More north south.
Plenty of times. Only when it was men, though.
I'll yell both. There's one thing I love. It's north south. I don't care if it's two kangaroos. You've got to see more north south.
Going off what you just said, though, I think a big name. I mean, WNBA had Lisa Lobo, Lisa
Lampanelli.
Lisa Lampanelli.
I have no idea.
They had the one girl in WNBA.
I don't know.
That ever.
I know who you're
Lisa
talking
Leslie.
about.
Lisa Leslie. Okay. That's who it was. But that was their big selling point. But the fact is there was never anyone that everyone could rally around, like or Sharapova, who was really good, or the what are the sisters' names?
Serena and Venus Williams.
Yes. There was never anyone that they could all rally around to really get behind as a female athlete. Gina Carano was really big, but I think for the wrong reasons, and everyone knew that she probably was a good fighter, but wasn't that good of a fighter. Ronda Rousey,
the wrong reasons, because she's
absolutely gorgeous.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that they really. I think they just like.
I don't think that's a
to watch
wrong
her.
reason to be famous.
Well, there's
or
plenty
even
of
like-
people that are famous just because of how attractive they are.
Yeah, I
that's
mean-
why we're going to be famous. Yeah.
No,
I
the
mean,
diastemas they had their brief 2-year run. They're over. American Outfitter had it. Models with it. It's done though.
so I mean, it is what it is. To that effect, I think what it is that there's an actual skill that is presented in women's MMA, and when they fight, it can be seen. The WNBA looks amateurish, as sad as that sounds. Women's MMA stopped looking amateurish, and they actually look like professional athletes. And being attractive, a lot of them, that doesn't hurt that.
My whole thing is what we wanted to get into is like just being on Twitter and stuff like that. Like this isn't a crusade to equalize women or anything like that, but like just seeing like the sexualized posts and things like that, or you told me about Karen Bryant that she gets sexually harassed all the time, and like that's the kind of stuff that we want to stop. And I think that we could do better as far as MMA. But as far as combat sports go, I think that it's a pretty awesome one. It empowers women. Just training, I've trained and sparred against women, and it's empowering for all people, and especially where, like I've talked to women where they've had to do checks on guys that they've been dating because he could be a killer. Like I've never thought about that. Like, hey, I should do a background check on the girl that I'm never crossed my mind, and it never will because I just don't care. But women have to because they have to learn to defend themselves. MMA can be empowering for that reason. Now, and I don't know if it's I don't know if other sports are empowering in the same way, and they might be. I can't say that because I haven't trained basketball or anything else with other sports, and I don't know where I was going with that. I had a very clear point, and now it's gone.
Well, it just reminds me of Hope Solo beating her boyfriend up. She's just a soccer player.
What do you mean just? She
Yeah, good point.
She is long as can be. She is an amazing goalkeeper.
Yeah, if they want to be more serious, why not do male and female mixed? Jordan's asking why men and women don't fight. The thing is size, first and foremost. Brute strength is the second. Third is the fact that it's just not natural is the third. And it's not something that should ever be pushed, I think. Speed is the second. I mean,
and so like as far as like would Ronda Rousey have beat up Floyd Mayweather? Floyd Mayweather? No, she wouldn't have. And it was silly when people were talking about. And I might have said that at one time. I don't know. I can't remember.
if she threw him and put him in an armbar, why not? She wouldn't have beat him up. She would have thrown him down and put him in an armbar. I mean,
I don't know.
I think he might have been too quick.
Then why didn't she Holly Holm? Yeah, well, why didn't she against Holly Holmes? Holly Holm.
It's a solid point. She tried.
Yeah,
wow,
she did try real hard.
There's also a different base. There's also a different base in sprawling and different things that you don't have to worry about in boxing. That
The thing is,
later on.
I mean, you're never going to see a woman fight a man in mixed martial arts because one, there's already too many problems in all of sports with domestic violence, and having that happen is never going to be a thing. You're never going to see that crossover. And in addition, it's not so much, we're not talking about has women's MMA made it in the sense that they can compete with the men. That's not the topic of discussion. I appreciate in MMA that women's MMA is what it is, but it's not hindered at all because they're women's in any way, shape, or form. Like women just as easily could headline a card. Like Ronda Rousey is the second biggest sell in the sport because of her personality and who she is, and nobody has put her under, like, has tried to like push it away. Like they in the UFC, they have put her in the forefront. She's on the cover of UFC 2. They do everything that they can to get her in the front. But at the same time, the UFC is set up for, and this is where I think maybe combat sports are different than other sports. Your personality comes through individually more than anywhere else. So if you are going to be a draw, you have that platform where you wouldn't in the WNBA, or I don't even know what other professional leagues there are.
Tennis,
soccer.
Well,
tennis too, though, because they're individuals.
Individual, and you can do your interviews and you can speak out for yourself. I think it was probably the best thing for the sport for Ronda Rousey to lose, for women's MMA, for the draw. Because now people want to see Ronda Rousey was dominant. Ronda Rousey was beating everyone. Who beat Ronda Rousey, and who's going to beat her? I think that only lasts for a couple months, maybe 6 months to a year, and then you need another strong, dominant contender
I disagree. I think that because who's going to fight next? We're gonna have Miesha and Ronda.
Mm-hmm.
I would really like to see Kat Zingano versus Holly Holm.
Mm-hmm.
And then you, depending on how that fight shakes out, you set up the winner of those two fights again. I mean, maybe you're right. A year's about right. I think it could play itself out over the next little bit. And if they keep beating each other, we'll see how long it goes for until one of them decides to retire.
I definitely think those four that rounds out the next year. I mean, it would be very easy to have those four fight each other, split, and then whoever holds the belt for whatever amount of time. If Holly Holm fights Ronda Rousey again, that's awesome. If she loses, she fights me. I mean, you could actually set those four up. It's almost like the heavyweight division. You could set those four up and let them fight like Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos, and Fabricio Verdum and whatever else. And Stipe.
The only difference is they show up.
Yeah, the only difference
and
is
they can
the
fight
women
for more than
actually show up.
one round.
Yeah, when's the last time a female fighter actually pulled out of a fight? I think there's been one, and it wasn't in the UFC, and it's because she got pregnant. I don't even know why she had to pull out of the fight, but just kidding. But no, I mean, the future.
Jordan said really quick, women will always be looked at sexually first, no matter what they're doing. It is what it is. And that's true. But I mean, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily right. And I don't have a problem with women being looked at sexually, just like I don't have a problem with men being looked at sexually. But they also have to be respected for what they bring to the table apart from that. If they're not necessarily the most attractive, that doesn't mean that you can't give them a contract. Because, like, what were you going to say?
No, keep going. Yeah,
I was just going to say, I as far as personality goes and things like that, Holly Holm is the most interesting female fighter to me. And I really like her as an individual. If you didn't sign her because she's not as attractive as ex-UFC fighter, I think that's stupid. Just because it would be the exact same thing if you did the same thing to men.
I think you mean ex-UFC fighter. 2 X's is a female XY.
Oh, hell. Yeah. And, but no, at the same time, though, additionally, it would be wrong if you did that for men because it doesn't legitimize the sport. That doesn't mean that you can't bring somebody on because they're attractive, though, even if they end up losing out. That goes the same for like CM Punk. Like you can bring him on, like for what he brings to the promotion. You can bring Paige Van Zandt on. She might lose every fight, but she's a crossover star that's doing Dancing with the Stars now. She brings crossover to so one, you can't bring women in just because they're attractive. Additionally, you can't bring men that way. You also can't exclude them because they're attractive. And you have to have an open mind when it comes to promotional type of sports like that.
What I was going to mention, and one of the things I really like about the UFC and Dana White in this case, is when, and I'm not going to mention names because I can't remember, and we were supposed to look this up before, but one of the fighters actually came out as openly as a lesbian, and I remember Dana White was asked about it, and he was like, "What does it matter? Like, it doesn't affect anything. Not her as a person, not her fighting style, not who she's fighting. Like,
isn't it Liz Carmouche?
I believe it's Liz Carmouche.
Sarah McMahon.
It could be that one too.
Sarah Man.
I'm not absolutely sure. This is a conversation we had. We named those two names and we were like, oh, we should probably look this up before. But it is one of the other sports as well that is empowering women, and a lot of women actually, just like soccer, women's soccer, where they can come out and say, I am a homosexual and this is something that I do and this is my career and it doesn't matter. And for the UFC as an organization to come out and be like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Obviously, we have no openly homosexual male athletes in the UFC. Nick Ring seemed like he may or may not have been, but that's all speculation. But at the same time, it wouldn't matter. I truly don't think it would matter if any UFC fighter came out as homosexual.
It was Liz Carmouche, by the way.
Yeah.
And then she fought Jessica Andrade, which was the first openly gay combat sport or openly gay fight ever. And they made history. It says UFC to make history with 2 openly lesbian fighters set to face off in Seattle. And that was 2013.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. For as much as the UFC is behind on certain things, like actually paying their fighters, they are ahead on a lot of other things, such as, giving people a second chance, as well as, innocent until proven guilty, and certain other aspects of things that society sometimes isn't necessarily on board with, that I get behind them with. Future of the women's division, what do you think happens? Obviously, when do you think that they actually start? How much time do you think they need to actually be at the same competitive level as the men? Not obviously, as we discussed, to fight the men, but like at a competitive level where you see them and you can't tell that they're not at the same physicality as the men.
You mean like, well, I would take that more as like a deep division where you can have like,
But
you're constantly having like a revolving door of.
But I'm talking technicality and training rather than like competitive as in a revolving door of fighters. Because when you watch women fight, they're not as fast and they're not as technical as the men.
Women's sports are always going to be different than men's. So, I mean, it's like when women, they say that in basketball, women, it's a different sport because it's more about the technique of shooting and stuff like that. They're not driving. It's not as powerful. Like they're just not driving the same way that men do. So as far as like comparing it to men in that way, that's why I would say you can't really, because it's always going to be different. But as far as like how long until I think that the women could be buoyed up and they could almost be like self-reliant where they could like all the women could headline a card and all the fights are compelling. I think they're ahead of the mark and they'll be there a lot quicker than it took the men to.
And that's what I was going to say. I mean, men started what, 1993, and it's taken them this long to get to where they are. Mm-hmm. I think the women they'll beat them by a decade.
I don't know if they'll ever have that many divisions.
No, women don't weigh the same. Mm-hmm. I mean, for that,
well, you can even go lower. I mean, that's not a big deal. I mean, what do they have? What's the lowest atom weight now?
Yeah, I believe so. It's only an Invicta, correct?
105.
I believe so.
So I mean, you could go the other way, but I still don't know if they'll ever have the same weight classes. But as far as what do I see for it, I think that they'll be. With Ronda in the sport, there's always going to be compelling storylines. She's always going to drive it, and she's always going to be interesting. The UFC's been around since 1993, Jordan, and mixed martial arts has been around for a little bit longer than that, pride fighting and stuff like that. But when she steps away, I think that we're going to probably go through a transition where women's sports drops off dramatically, or women's MMA does, but then it'll come back up. There'll be another sport. There'll be another star.
What do you think happens with this season of Tough with both men and women in the house? Do you think they're trying to set it up for...
Yes, I already know the question. I already know the answer. 100%. It's TV. You have to. Why do you think they give them alcohol?
Yeah, and that's a solid point. Obviously the UFC knows what they're doing. I don't want it to turn into Big Brother UFC, but you're right. I mean, that is something that could easily happen and something that they could try and sell. I haven't seen anything yet. I mean, it starts April 20th, and you haven't seen anything from in the house that shows, males and females, pairing off. But at the same time, alcohol and sexuality definitely don't go together very well. And yeah.
Well, and isolationism.
And
that's what, I mean, MTV has been doing forever with The Real World. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how you make reality TV shows.
It basically is The Real World Tough.
Yeah. And I mean, again, like, there's no problem with that. Like, that's what TV is. If you're going to be on TV, like, that's what it is. Like, so what do you want?
I would like them to take it seriously. I would like the UFC. They were getting so good at just being like, these people are going to fight. These are the best fighters that are potentially going to get into the UFC. If you don't like it, we don't care. This is a great gateway for these people to actually fight each other. And they were losing a ton of ground, and they were losing a lot of views and different things like that. But we've talked about this all the time. I'm not a big fan of spectacle and 15 minutes of fame and, hey, watch this train wreck. I don't like that kind of stuff.
The UFC is where it is today because of reality TV.
Tough, yeah. The very first Tough, we had Chris Lieben pissing on Koscheck's bed.
Yep.
And getting drunk and trying to pick fights and just being a wreck.
And then what did that set?
Being a crazy.
What did that set the platform up for? The whole series was interesting. And so then it set the stage. And this is the whole point. Like, you maybe don't like it, or maybe it's an offhand way of doing things, but you set up everything that you can, bring as much attention onto it so that your final product that you have, hopefully you get enough eyes on it and that it's up to par, that it just moves the sport into the next stratosphere, whatever the hell you want to call it. So, like, for example, you had all these crazy ass things that maybe we all necessarily don't agree with happening, and then it set the stage for Forrest Griffin versus Stephen Bonner, and then people were all of a sudden tuning into that, and it became a pivotal moment. Like there's very few sports where you can say this is where it got famous, this is where it's big, this is the turning point of the sport. That was the turning point of mixed martial arts.
I agree 100%. I remember watching the first season of Tough and thinking it was awesome, and not knowing a whole bunch about the UFC at the time, but knowing it existed and being like, oh, this is on TV. I can actually now watch it on TV rather than having to find some VHS at Blockbuster.
And then you have to go find a VHS player.
Exactly. And so, no, I mean, I agree. And I like Tough for what it is. I mean, I would watch without presenting who the fighters were and doing the backstories and all of that. If they just put the tough fighters in a house and had them fight, I'd be stoked on it.
Sharon said Rip Blockbuster.
Did you see the Brooklyn Nine-Nine where his rich grandfather leaves him money, but it's all Blockbuster stock?
No.
It's like $1 million Blockbuster stock. And he's like, yes, I've got $1 million. Is Blockbuster still worth something? And they're like, we've got bad news for you. It's actually gone out of business. And with that, thanks again for tuning in, you guys. We really appreciate all of our listeners. Talk to us on Twitter. We love having conversations. We have a lot of conversations on Twitter about a lot of different things. People will ask us all kinds of different questions. Question of the week, if you get this far into the podcast, what are your thoughts on women's MMA? What do you think the future of women's MMA will be? And once again, follow us on Twitter. If you're already listening to this, you probably do, at OneSpeedMMA. From Carson to Justin, thanks again.
Love you, bye.
Bye. Thanks, Jordan.